I'm Father Alexander. This is St. Peter's Hove, and it's time for us to take our 124th step in our walking tour through the Bible, and we come to the Book of Tobit. Now, the Book of Tobit was written sometime in the Persian period. We know that. The Book of Tobit is not a historical book. The Book of Tobit is a fairy tale. It's a work of fiction. That is to say, it's a didactic work of fiction. That's why I call it a fairy tale. It's a pleasurable book that's meant to teach you something. It's meant to illustrate certain virtues so that you, the reader, are inspired by what you read and will go and do likewise. Tobit is a character who's living in Persia. He's got into trouble in the past because he's buried dead Israelites, which aroused the rage of Sennacherib, who would have had him killed, but he was lucky he got off because his nephew interceded for him. Historically, this is impossible that he was living in exile in the Persian period and yet he remembers the siege of Sennacherib, but never mind about that. The point about Tobit is he's a very, very, very good Jew. Not only does he bury his fellow countrymen, which is a right thing to do, you know how important funerals are for our Jewish brethren. He also, even though he lives in exile, he doesn't touch anything that has been cooked by Persians. He keeps strict kashrut, that is to say, he only eats the right sort of thing in accordance with the Mosaic law, that which has been properly prepared. I was careful not to eat the food of the heathen, he tells us in the first chapter. The other thing was he marries a woman of his own sort of clan. That is to say, he marries a Jewish woman who is related to him. So he is not marrying out, another thing that you shouldn't do if you're properly Jewish. Now, unfortunately for Tobit, having had a lucky escape for the burial of the dead, he then goes back to where he lives. It's a town called Ecbatana, and he does it again. His son Tobias comes in and tells him he's found a dead Jew in the marketplace. Tobit buries the dead Jew and goes into mourning for him. Excellent. But then, having done all this good deeds, he goes and has a bath. The birds, um, the droppings of the birds fall on his eyes, unusual, and he's blinded. And as a result, he seems to be punished by God rather than rewarded for his good works. Now, in this, he reminds us, does he not, of that other person who comes later on in the Bible, Job. Job is a good man who nevertheless seems to be punished by God. And his wife then has to go out, she's called Anna, she has to go out and take in washing and weaving and spinning and things like that. She takes in women's work so that the family can survive. And then one day she brings back a goat, which is a present, and he upbraids her, thinking she's stolen the goat. And then she upbraids him, saying, look, all your good works, where have they got us? Here we are, down on our luck, and punished, it seems, by the Almighty. Whereupon the third chapter of Tobit launches into this psalm, which is a summing up of the history of Israel, saying, we've sinned against you, O Lord, we've sinned against you, and we've been justly punished. Now, he says, if only I could die, because I can't bear it any longer. So, in other words, Tobit is at a very low ebb, and that is the first part of the story. Now, this is obviously the reader. Let the reader understand. Tobit's at a very low ebb. What's going to happen next? Well, his fortunes are going to revive. That is what is going to happen next. The story follows this very common route of a fall from high estate and then, of course, a revival. The wheel of fortune has turned, but the wheel of fortune will turn again. And of course, the young man, Tobias, the son, is going to have something to do with that. Tobit's a delightful story. Those first three chapters are truly a delight to read. You feel for the characters, and yet at the same time, you know that the characters are fiction. We feel for Snow White, yet we know she's fictional. We feel for all those people in fairy stories, yet we know they are fictional. We feel particularly for the poor girl who pricks her finger on a spindle. What is she called? I can't remember her name. And then dies. Sleeping Beauty. We feel for her, but we know it's only a story. So we're not traumatized by the pain we uh, feel for Tobit's blindness. We know this is going to have a happy ending. A fairy story justifies the ways of God to men. A fairy story always ends with the triumph of the good people. And so, therefore, this is relaxing reading rather than harrowing reading. The book of Job, I think, is much more harrowing. This, not so much. Now, that third chapter is still used in the liturgy in the Office of the Hours. You are just, O Lord, and just are all your works. All your ways are grace and truth, and you are the judge of the world. Therefore, Lord, remember me, look on me. Do not punish me for my sins or my needless faults or those of my ancestors, for we have sinned against you and broken your commandments. So Tobit's story, the fall from high estate, also mirrors the story of the Jewish people who have fallen from high estate because of their sins. For we have sinned against you and broken your commandments, and you have given us over to be plundered and to captivity and death, and so on. So just as God is going to restore Tobit's fortunes, God will also restore the fortunes of the people of Israel, which we've already heard about, haven't we, in the books of Nehemiah and Ezra, the restoration of the people of Israel from a bunch of exiles to a nation once more. I like too this little bit of characterization we have that the wife is a bit of a shrew. She's a bit of a nag, but she's got a point. She says, "What about your own good works?" She said. "Everybody knows what return you've had for them. Here you are, old and blind and poor. You've done all these good works. Has God not rewarded you? No, look how it's ended." And we too may feel that, because fairy stories, don't forget, are also very serious stories. We too may feel that we're discouraged in our good works. We've tried to do the right thing. We might have dedicated ourselves for years working away in the vineyard of the Lord, and we've got absolutely nowhere. But it will come right in the end, I think, is what the Book of Tobit is telling us. Do not be discouraged. Things will come right in the end. Well, that's the first 3 chapters of the Book of Tobit, and we'll leave it there. Well, the second part of chapter 3 deals with a young lady called Sarah, and we'll get on to her next time. All the very best. Goodbye for now.